Father Schopenhauer was born in Danzig, now Gdansk, in 1788. His family had been rich Hanseatic merchants for generations, and the upbringing he received was aimed not at an academic life, but at training him to step into an international business. However, he had no interest in the family firm. He insisted on going to university instead, and thereafter he used his private means to finance a lifetime of independent study and writing. His doctorate thesis has become a minor classic, in spite of its title, On the Fourfold Root of the Principle of Sufficient Reason. And he was still in his 20s during the 4 years when he composed his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, which was published in 1818, the year in which he was 30. From then until his death in 1860, at the age of 72, he published a great deal, but all of it was to extend or elaborate or enrich the philosophical system which he had constructed in his 20s and from which he never departed. He produced a huge collection of essays called Parerga and Paralipomena, and 2 short but pungent books on ethics called The Basis of Morality and The Freedom of the Will. There was also a little book called On the Will in Nature, designed to show that his ideas were supported by discoveries in science. Most important of all, he published a revised edition of The World as Will and Representation, which was more than twice the length of the original volume. There are several remarkable things about him. Although in direct succession to Kant's, his own work was securely in the mainstream of Western philosophy, he was genuinely knowledgeable about Hinduism and Buddhism, and is the only major Western philosopher to draw serious and interesting parallels between Western and Eastern thought.
As far as you are an individual, death will be the end of you. But your individuality is not your true and inmost being. It is only the outward manifestation of it. It is not the thing in itself, but only the phenomenon presented in the form of time, and therefore with a beginning and an end. But your real being knows neither time nor beginning nor end, nor yet the limits of any given individual. It is everywhere present in every individual, and no individual can exist apart from it. So when death comes, on the one hand, you are annihilated as an individual. On the other, you are and remain everything. That is what I meant when I said that after your death, you would be all and nothing. It is difficult to find a more precise answer to your question, and at the same time be brief. The answer is contradictory, I admit, but it is so simply because your life is in time, and the immortal part of you in eternity. You may put the matter thus. Your immortal part is something that does not last in time, and yet is indestructible. But there you have another contradiction. You see what happens by trying to bring the transcendental within the limits of immanent knowledge? It is in some sort doing violence to the latter by misusing it for ends it was never meant to serve.
Kant had argued that all possible experience can only come to us through our faculties, through our sensory and mental apparatus. And therefore what we could experience depended not only on what there is out there to experience, but also on the nature of the faculties that we possess. What our faculties could handle, what they do to what they handle, how they handle it, and so on. So that all experience as such is subject-dependent. And he went on from that to argue that therefore we could see total reality as being divided into 2. There are things as they are in themselves, independently of being experienced, and to such things we have no means of access. And then there's things as they appear to us, the world of appearances, the world as it comes to us through experience, and that's what we know. That's the world of common sense, the world of science, our total world. Now, Schopenhauer took this up from Kant and said, now, can we get any pointers, can we get any hints from a close analysis of this world of experience as to what it might be that underlies it, as to what it might be that lies behind it?
What Plato says is this: the things of this world which our senses perceive have no true being. They always become, they never are. They have only a relative being. They all exist merely in and through their relations to each other. Their whole being may therefore quite as well be called a non-being. They are consequently not objects of a true knowledge, for such a knowledge can only be of what exists for itself, and always in the same way. They, on the contrary, are only the objects of an opinion based on sensation. So long as we are confined to the perception of these, we are like men who sit in a dark cave, bound so fast that they cannot turn their heads, and who see nothing but the shadows of real things which pass between them and a fire burning behind them, the light of which casts the shadow on the wall opposite them, and even of themselves and of each other they see only the shadows on the wall. Their wisdom would thus consist in predicting the order of the shadows learned from experience. The real archetypes, on the other hand, to which these shadows correspond, the eternal ideas, the original forms of all things, can only be said to have true being, because they always are, but never become nor pass away. To them belongs no multiplicity, for each of them is according to its nature only one.
Think what you're doing when you say, I want to exist. It is not you alone that says this. Everything says it. Absolutely everything that has the faintest trace of consciousness. It follows, then, that this desire of yours is just the part of you that is not individual, the part that is common to all things without distinction. It is the cry, not of the individual, but of existence itself. It is the intrinsic element in everything that exists. Nay, it is the cause of anything existing at all. This desire craves for, and so is satisfied with, nothing less than existence in general. Not any definite individual existence. No, that is not its aim. It seems to be so only because this desire, this will, attains consciousness only in the individual, and therefore looks as though it were concerned with nothing but the individual. There lies the illusion. An illusion, it is true, in which the individual is held fast, but if he reflects, he can break the fetters and set himself free.
Schopenhauer argued that for one thing to be different from another thing, for anything to be different from anything else at all, this idea of differentiation only made sense with reference either to time, or to space, or to both. If two things are identical in time and identical in space, then they're identical, period. They're the same thing. So the notion of there being different things, in the plural, could only apply to this world of our experience, this world of space and time. Outside that world, it could make no sense whatever to talk of anything being different from anything else.
Time is that in which all things pass away. It is merely the form under which the will to live, the thing in itself, and therefore imperishable, has revealed to it that its efforts are in vain. It is that agent by which, at every moment, all things in our hands become as nothing, and lose any real value they possess.
Time is nothing more than that form of the principle of sufficient reason, and has no further significance. Succession is the form of the principle of sufficient reason in time, and succession is the whole nature of time. Further, whoever has recognized the principle of sufficient reason, as it appears in the presentation of pure space, has exhausted the whole nature of space, which is absolutely nothing more than that possibility of the reciprocal determination of its parts by each other, which is called position. The existence of matter is therefore entirely relative, according to a relation which is valid only within its limits, as in the case of time and space. But time and space, each for itself, can be mentally presented apart from matter, whereas matter cannot be so presented apart from time and space. The form which is inseparable from it presupposes space, and the action in which its very existence consists always imports some change, in other words, a determination in time. But space and time are not only, each for itself, presupposed by matter, but a union of the two constitutes its essence. For this, as we have seen, consists in action, that is, in causation. Again, if the world were in time alone, all would be fleeting, without persistence, without contiguity, hence without coexistence, and consequently without permanence. So that in this case also there would be no matter. Only through the union of space and time do we reach matter, and matter is the possibility of coexistence, and through that of permanence. Through permanence, again, matter is the possibility of the persistence of substance in the change of its states.
Hence, something of great importance now past is inferior to something of little importance now present, in that the latter is a reality, and related to the former as something to nothing. A man finds himself, to his great astonishment, suddenly existing after thousands and thousands of years of non-existence. He lives for a little while, and then, again, comes an equally long period when he must exist no more. The heart rebels against this, and feels that it cannot be true.
Whatever there is outside this world of our experience must be one and undifferentiated. And in taking that step from Kant, he thought Kant had been wrong in talking about things in the plural, in themselves, things as they are in themselves, that it must be one undifferentiated something that lies behind this world. Now, in saying that, he took an enormous stride towards one of the central beliefs of Hinduism and Buddhism. Those religions also believe that behind this highly differentiated, plural, variegated world of phenomena, there is one single undifferentiated something that manifests itself as this world. And one striking thing is that Schopenhauer didn't get the belief from Buddhism or Hinduism. He got it by arguing from premises that he derived from his predecessor Western philosophers, and then discovered that he'd reached a conclusion which was similar to that of the Buddhists and the Hindus.
The world is my idea. This is a truth which holds good for everything that lives and knows, though man alone can bring it into reflective and abstract consciousness. If he really does this, he has attained to philosophical wisdom. It then becomes clear and certain to him that what he knows is not a sun and an earth, but only an eye that sees a sun, a hand that feels an earth, that the world which surrounds him is there only as idea, that is, only in relation to something else, the consciousness, which is himself. The ancient wisdom of the Indian philosophers declares, it is Maya, the veil of deception, which blinds the eyes of mortals, and makes them behold a world of which they cannot say either that it is or that it is not. For it is like a dream. It is like the sunshine on the sand, which the traveler takes from afar for water, or the stray piece of rope he mistakes for a snake. These similes are repeated in innumerable passages of the Vedas and the Puranas.
The world is entirely idea, and as such demands the knowing subject as the supporter of its existence. This long course of time itself, filled with innumerable changes, through which matter rose from form to form till at last the first percipient creature appeared, this whole time itself is only thinkable in the identity of a consciousness whose succession of ideas, whose form of knowing it is, and apart from which, it loses all meaning and is nothing at all. Thus we see, on the one hand, the existence of the whole world necessarily dependent upon the first conscious being, however undeveloped it may be. On the other hand, this conscious being, just as necessarily, entirely dependent upon a long chain of causes and effects which have preceded it, and in which it itself appears as a small link.
Kant had argued that all our knowledge of material objects must come to us, and can come to us only through our senses, and there be, as it were, put together by our minds. Schopenhauer said, well, this is almost exactly right, but there is one absolutely crucial exception to it, which amazingly Kant seems to have overlooked, and that is that for every individual one of us, there is one unique physical object in the world, which we know in the way Kant says we know physical objects, but we also know in a radically and entirely different way, namely directly from inside, and that is ourselves, our own bodies, our own persons. They are physical objects in the way that any other physical object is a physical object, and they can be seen and touched and heard and known in all the ways that other physical objects are known. But each one of us, in addition to that, has immediate non-sensory knowledge of this one physical object from inside, directly.
You may look upon life as an unprofitable episode, disturbing the blessed calm of non-existence. And, in any case, even though things have gone with you tolerably well, the longer you live, the more clearly you will feel that, on the whole, life is a disappointment, nay, a cheat. If two men who were friends in their youth meet again when they are old, after being separated for a lifetime, the chief feeling they will have at the sight of each other will be one of complete disappointment at life as a whole, because their thoughts will be carried back to that earlier time when life seemed so fair as it lay spread out before them in the rosy light of dawn, promised so much, and then performed so little. However varied the forms that human happiness and misery may take, leading a man to seek the one and shun the other, the material basis of it all is bodily pleasure or bodily pain. This basis is very restricted. It is simply health, food, protection from wet and cold, the satisfaction of the sexual instinct, or else the absence of these things. Consequently, as far as real physical pleasure is concerned, the man is not much better off than the brute, except in so far as the higher possibilities of his nervous system make him more sensitive to every kind of pleasure, but also, it must be remembered, to every kind of pain. The life of the brute carries less sorrow with it, but also less of joy when compared with the life of man. And while this may be traced, on the one side, to freedom from the torment of care and anxiety, it is also due to the fact that hope, in any real sense, is unknown to the brute. It is thus deprived from any share in that which gives us the most and best of our joys and pleasures, the mental anticipation of a happy future. There is one respect in which brutes show real wisdom when compared to us. I mean their quiet, placid enjoyment of the present moment. The tranquility of mind which this seems to give them often puts us to shame, for the many times we allow our thoughts and our cares to make us restless and discontented. And in fact, those pleasures of hope and anticipation which I have been mentioning are not to be had for nothing. The delight which a man has in hoping for and looking forward to some special satisfaction is a part of the real pleasure attached to it, enjoyed in advance. This is afterwards deducted, for the more we look forward to anything, the less satisfaction we find in it when it comes. But the brute's enjoyment is not anticipated, and therefore suffers no deduction, so that the actual pleasure of the moment comes to it whole and unimpaired. In the same way, too, evil presses upon the brute only with its own intrinsic weight, whereas with us, the fear of it coming often makes its burden 10 times more grievous. It is just this characteristic way in which the brute gives itself up entirely to the present moment that contributes so much to the delight that we take in our domestic pets. They are the present moment personified, and in some respects they make us feel the value of every hour that is free from trouble and annoyance, which we, with our thoughts and preoccupations, mostly disregard. But man, that selfish and heartless creature, misuses this quality of the brute to be more content than we are with mere existence, and often works it to such an extent that he allows the brute absolutely nothing more than mere bare life. The bird which was made so that it might rove over half of the world he shuts up into the space of a cubic foot, there to die a slow death in longing and crying for freedom, for in a cage it does not sing for the pleasure of it. And when I see how man misuses the dog, his best friend, how he ties up this intelligent animal with a chain, I feel the deepest sympathy with the brute, and burning indignation against its master.
Schopenhauer argued that all knowledge must be of a dual form, subject and object, knower and known, observer and observed, that for there to be any knowledge at all of anything, you must have something that's grasped and something that's grasping it. And this differentiation can only exist within this phenomenal world, this world of experience. And therefore, it's only in this world that there can be knowledge or can be consciousness.
In the first place, a man never is happy, but spends his whole life in striving after something which he thinks will make him so. He seldom attains his goal, and when he does, it is only to be disappointed. He is mostly shipwrecked in the end, and comes into harbor with masts and rigging gone. And then, it is all one whether he has been happy or miserable, for his life was never anything more than a present moment, always vanishing, and now it is over. At the same time, it is a wonderful thing that, in the world of human beings as in that of animals in general, this manifold restless motion is produced and kept up by the agency of two simple impulses, hunger and the sexual instinct, aided a little, perhaps, by the influence of boredom, but by nothing else. And that, in the theater of life, these suffice to form the prima mobile of how complicated a machinery, setting in motion how strange and varied a scene. Human life must be some kind of mistake. The truth of this will be sufficiently obvious if we only remember that man is a compound of needs and necessities hard to satisfy, and that even when they are satisfied, all he obtains is a state of painlessness, where nothing remains to him but abandonment to boredom. This is direct proof that existence has no real value in itself. For what is boredom but the feeling of the emptiness of life? If life, the craving for which is the very essence of our being, were possessed of any positive intrinsic value, there would be no such thing as boredom at all. Mere existence would satisfy us in itself, and we should want for nothing. But, as it is, we take no delight in existence except when we are struggling for something, and then distance and difficulties to be overcome make our goal look as though it would satisfy us, an illusion which vanishes when we reach it, or else when we are occupied with some purely intellectual interest.
Schopenhauer argues that what is ultimate in this world of phenomena, in this world of experience, is energy. And at the scientific level, in speaking from the standpoint of our own day, he can be said to have been remarkably prevoyant, to have been correct. Now, he says that the metaphysical, the underlying noumenon, is whatever manifests itself as this energy. And throughout the cosmos, I mean, in the stars and the solar system, in animals, in trees, in falling stones, in ourselves, in everything. It's the unconscious energy that forms us in the womb, that makes our organs work while we sleep, and so on. And I understand him as saying that the nearest we come to getting any glimmering of what that is in experience is the experience we have inside ourselves of the energy, the go, the force, the will to exist, the will to survive, that somehow ultimate and irreducible push or drive, which is underlying to everything else.
A truth at which we can arrive only by deeper research and more severe abstraction, by the separation of what is different and the union of what is identical. This truth, which must be very serious and impressive, if not awful to everyone, is that a man can also say, and must say, "The world is my will."
The objective world, the world as idea, is not the only side of the world, but merely its outward side. And it has an entirely different side, the side of its inmost nature, its kernel, the thing in itself. This we shall consider in the second book, calling it after the most immediate of its objective manifestations, will.
I think it would have been better if he'd used the word energy, because he decided to give the name will to this metaphysical reality. And I think that's misled people ever since, because we can't help associating the idea of a personality with a will, or the idea of an aim with a will. When Schopenhauer himself reiterates at different points in his writings that he doesn't mean that in his sense of the word will, everything has a will. A dead star or a stone has as much will as you or I, that it is simply the metaphysical substratum, as it were, in everything, that it's not personal, not alive, not organic, not has no aim, and so on. I think it's misled people. An impersonal word like energy would have been very much better, in my opinion.
Will, as the thing in itself, is the foundation of all being. It is part and parcel of every creature, and the permanent element in everything. Will, then, is that which we possess in common with all men. Nay, with all animals, and even with lower forms of existence. And in so far we are akin to everything, so far that is, as everything is filled to overflowing with will. On the other hand, that which places one being over another and sets differences between man and man is intellect and knowledge. Therefore, in every manifestation of self we should, as far as possible, give play to the intellect alone, for as we have seen, the will is the common part of us. Every violent exhibition of will is common and vulgar. In other words, it reduces us to the level of the species. It makes us a mere type and example of it, in that it is just the character of the species that we are showing. So every great fit of anger is something common. Every unrestrained display of joy or of hate or fear, in short, every form of emotion, in other words, every movement of the will, if it's so strong as decidedly to outweigh the intellectual element in consciousness, and to make the man appear as a being that wills rather than knows. In giving way to emotion of this violent kind, the greatest genius puts himself on a level with the commonest son of earth. Contrarily, if a man desires to be absolutely uncommon, in other words, great, he should never allow his consciousness to be taken possession of and dominated by the movement of his will, however much he may be solicited thereto. For example, he must be able to observe that other people are badly disposed towards him, without feeling any hatred towards them himself. Nay, there is no surer sign of a great mind than that it refuses to notice annoying and insulting expressions, but straightway ascribes them, as it ascribes countless other mistakes, to the defective knowledge of the speaker, and so merely observes without feeling them. This is the meaning of that remark of Gratian, that nothing is more unworthy of a man than to let it be seen that he is one.
He had this metaphysical view that we were all ultimately one, and again that is in common with some religions, and therefore that in doing you an injury I am in some significant ultimate sense injuring myself, and that my ultimate oneness with you is really the basis of morality, the basis of compassion, the basis of empathy. It's why I should behave towards you in morally approved ways and not behave towards you in aggressive ways.
We might well consider the proper form of address to be not Monsieur, Sir, Mein Herr, but my fellow sufferer. This may perhaps sound strange, but it is in keeping with the facts. It puts others in a right light, and it reminds us of that which is after all the most necessary thing in life, the tolerance, patience, regard, and love of neighbor, of which everyone stands in need, and which, therefore, every man owes to his fellow.
Now, what's a really common prescription that people typically write early on in their life about what's going to make them happy? What's a common thing that people want at some point in their life that they think is going to fill their life with joy? Well, I want to graduate college. I want to get a job. I want to live in the city. I want to meet somebody, fall in love, get married, have kids, and live happily ever after. Right? Now, if you're somebody listening to this that has this dream of falling in love, getting married, having kids, or even if you're somebody that had this dream at some point in your life, Schopenhauer would probably want to ask you, why do you think you have this dream? Specifically, this one in particular. Why do you think so many other people have this very same dream? What is it about it? Why are you so sure that getting married and having kids is going to bring you happiness? And intuitively, as human beings, the answer seems pretty straightforward, right? Companionship. Someone's always going to be there for you. But Schopenhauer would say, that may be the story that you tell yourself in your head of why you want love in your life, but it's not why you're actually doing it. And look, love to Schopenhauer is no question one of the greatest things about life. He's just saying, understand the true reason you have such a strong desire to fall in love during your lifetime. He thinks that love is an elaborate scam. Run from the altars. Call the Attorney General. You are being conned, people. It's all a big scam. You're not getting married and having kids because you think it's going to make you happy. No, the will to life, this force that we're all enslaved to, is subconsciously compelling you to want kids for the sake of the propagation of the species. And if you doubt this, just think about the decision to have kids for a second. Think about all the costs that are associated with it. The financial costs, diapers are expensive. The emotional cost, cleaning crayon off the wall. The opportunity cost, all the things you could be doing. The cost of sleep deprivation, the cost of fearing for their safety, the cost of getting frustrated with them. Having a kid is an absolutely massive responsibility to take on. Nobody would disagree with that. Schopenhauer thinks that if you truly considered all the costs associated with having kids before having them, no rational being would ever have kids. It just wouldn't do it. No person thinking clearly would ever trade 10 to 15 minutes of feeling good for a lifetime of costs and responsibilities. He says that the will to life realizes this, and it needs some powerful feeling that it can evoke in you and make you into a completely irrational person for a short period of time so that you'll have kids and keep the species going. We call this feeling of irrationality love. Love feels so good when you have it, and people want it so badly in their lives. But to Schopenhauer, it is the vehicle driving you to commit some crime that you'll later plead temporary insanity to. I mean, think of all the irrational things people have done in the name of love. Think of the blinders they put on. Think of the stories they tell themselves, the games they play. These are sick people. Now, some of you may be asking, okay, Schopenhauer, if love really is what you say it is, if it really is just a force that's enslaving me with the sole task of propagating the species, why don't I love everyone? I mean, couldn't I have kids with basically anybody walking down the street, barring them having had some sort of tragic accident? Well, yeah, you could. But the propagation of the species is not just concerned with sheer numbers. There are other criteria involved. And that whether you realize it or not, to Schopenhauer, the reason you fall in love with the people you do is not because you actually like things about their personality or feel comfortable with them. It's because you're subconsciously reading something about them. You're reading that they have strengths in areas that you have weaknesses, and they're reading that you have strengths where they have weaknesses. Aspects of both of your characters and appearances balance out each other, the end product of this entire exchange being more balanced and healthy children that are more likely to go on and reproduce. Schopenhauer thought that people who are tall tend to end up with people who are short. People who are meek tend to end up with people who are more courageous. Even though to you it just feels like you're making a free choice and that you really just like this person. What's actually going on is you're being subconsciously manipulated by the will to life to be attracted to a person that will create balanced children and propagate the species.
I may mention that as regards the sexual relation, a man is committed to a peculiar arrangement which drives him obstinately to choose one person. This feeling grows now and then into a more or less passionate love, which is the source of little pleasure and much suffering.
Maybe this is the reason so many people have the experience where they meet somebody, they fall in love, get married, have kids, and then either get divorced or remain immiserated in a relationship for decades, staying together for the kids. Why is that such a common thing that people do? Schopenhauer says that getting married is like grasping blind into a sack of snakes and hoping to find an eel. This is one of my favorite passages of his. It's from his work, The World as Will and Representation. It goes like this, quote, "A girl who rejects the proposal of a wealthy man and not an old man, against her parents' convenience, according to her instinctive inclination, sacrifices her individual welfare to that of the species. But on this very account, we cannot withhold a certain approbation, for she has preferred what is more important and has acted in the spirit of nature, whereas the parents advised her in the spirit of individual egoism. In consequence of all this, it seems as if, in making a marriage, either the individual or the interest of the species must come off badly. often this must be the case, for that convenience and passionate love should go hand in hand is the rarest stroke of good fortune.
He's had enormous influence on creative artists. One might name Wagner an enormous influence, Turgenev an enormous influence. In fact, lots of major novelists of the last 100 years, Conrad, Thomas Hardy, Proust, Thomas Mann. But perhaps in a discussion which is about philosophy, what we ought to concentrate on is not that so much as his influence on other major thinkers. And I think three stand out in importance: Nietzsche, Freud, and Wittgenstein, as having, in chronological order, as having been very obviously and strikingly influenced by Schopenhauer between his day and ours.
Music is thus by no means, like the other arts, the copy of the ideas, but the copy of the will itself, whose objectivity the ideas are. This is why the effect of music is so much more powerful and penetrating than that of the other arts, for they speak only of shadows, but it speaks of the thing itself. Since, however, it is the same will which objectifies itself both in the ideas and in music, though in quite different ways, there must be not indeed a direct likeness, but yet a parallel, an analogy, between music and the ideas, whose manifestation in multiplicity and incompleteness is the visible world.
Let us move on, as it were, to the final stage of Schopenhauer's philosophy, when he, taking his value judgment, seeing that reality in all its or in most of its manifestations, is an evil, a frightening, a nightmarish thing, the final step in his philosophy, which some have embraced and others have found impossible even to understand sometimes, is he says we must reject this. Ultimately, we must reject reality. We must deny reality, the famous denial of the will.
Man has intentionally added to the number and pressure of his needs, which in their original state were not much more difficult to satisfy than those of the brute. Hence, luxury in all its forms, delicate food, the use of tobacco and opium, spirituous liquors, fine clothes, and the 1,001 things that he considers necessary to his existence. And above and beyond all this, there is a separate and peculiar source of pleasure and consequently of pain, which man has established for himself, also as the result of using his powers of reflection. And this occupies him out of all proportion to its value, nay, almost more than all his other interests put together. I mean ambition, and the feeling of honor and shame. In plain words, what he thinks about the opinion other people have of him. Taking 1,000 forms, often very strange ones, this becomes the goal of almost all the efforts he makes that are not rooted in physical pleasure or pain. If we turn from contemplating the world as a whole, and in particular the generations of men as they live their little hour of mock existence, and then are swept away in rapid succession, if we turn from this, and look at life in its small details, as presented, say, in a comedy, how ridiculous it all seems. It is like a drop of water seen through a microscope, a single drop, teeming with infusoria, or a speck of cheese full of mites invisible to the naked eye. How we laugh as they bustle about so eagerly and struggle with one another in so tiny a space. And whether here, or in the little span of human life, this terrible activity produces a comic effect. It is only in the microscope that our life looks so big. It is an indivisible point, drawn out and magnified by the powerful lenses of time and space.